Welcome back. I've had a craving for candied ginger lately, but even the best kinds that I can get from the store are either too tough, kind of dried out, or just not really what I'm looking for one way or another. And it got me thinking. Ginger is fairly inexpensive, and it can't be that hard to make a better candied ginger at home. So after a few trials and experiments, and one attempt to record this video where a fly kept landing on things and I went a little bit crazy like that scene in Breaking Bad, get out of there, you God damn it. Gotcha. Might have broken my hand over ginger syrup on a fly, but we're gonna make it through this video. Here's my recipe for candied ginger that's sweet and spicy, crispy on the outside, and still juicy on the inside. And spoiler, it's delicious dipped in chocolate. This recipe also makes some really useful byproducts. Using 2 pounds of ginger, I ended up with 6 cups of ginger tea, 2 cups of ginger syrup, and some ginger sugar that I can use to dust the top of an apple crisp or cupcakes or really anything you'd want ginger and sugar on, so everything. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more homemade food. Let's start by going everything you'll need in case you want to follow along. The most important ingredient in this recipe is ginger, and I'll be using 2 pounds. If you can, try to get younger looking ginger that isn't wrinkled or shriveled, but older ginger works fine too, just as long as it's not rotten. I use an equal weight of sugar, so since I'm using 2 pounds of ginger, I'll also need 2 pounds of sugar, plus enough to dust them at the end, maybe half a cup. The amount of water you use is kind of up to you. I used 6 cups because that was enough to completely cover my ginger and gave me enough headroom to be able to stir it. But if you want to use more in order to make more ginger tea out of this recipe, you absolutely can. Just be careful straining it. If you're covering your candied ginger in chocolate, which I heavily recommend you do, you'll need whatever kind of chocolate you like, and depending on what you're using, either a small amount of fat or oil to thin it out makes dipping it a lot easier. I used 100 grams of pure semi-sweet chocolate chips, added to 10 grams of sunflower oil, and that 10-to-1 ratio gave me exactly the consistency I wanted. I like to keep my chocolate-covered ginger in the fridge, but if you want them to be more counter-stable, try using coconut oil or maybe butter instead, since those fats are solid at room temperature. You just might need to warm up the chocolate a couple of times while you're dipping them. As far as equipment, you're going to need a large enough pot to fit all of your ginger and sugar and have enough room to still stir it safely while it simmers. Don't try to do this in a too small pot unless you love the smell of burnt sugar when it drips over the side onto your heating element. You're going to need a grater unless you prefer sliced candied ginger. If you do want to peel and slice your ginger into rounds and follow this recipe from that point onwards, it should still work perfectly fine. I tried making them both ways, and I really prefer it grated. The chewy, fibrous parts of the ginger really dissolve to nothing in your mouth much more easily. You'll need something to strain it with. I've got this weird metal jelly strainer thing that seems to work perfectly, but you might have to balance a strainer on top of a mixing bowl or get a little creative depending on what you have at your disposal. And finally, you'll need a baking tray with some parchment paper or a silicone mat to spread your candies out onto. Now that we have everything ready, let's get started. The first choice to make is, should I peel my ginger? And the answer is, maybe. If you leave the skin on, the ginger tea you end up with has a little bit more of an earthy, honestly kind of a spicy dirt taste. It's not good at all on its own, but with a little bit of lemon and honey or mixed into another drink, it can be refreshingly interesting. It's a little bit similar to that earthy flavor you get from rhubarb, but a little more earthy. If you're making this for the first time and you're not really sure if you're going to like ginger tea or not, you should probably peel the ginger. Leaving the peel on doesn't seem to negatively affect the syrup or the candied ginger, and apparently I don't mind the taste of a warm cup of spicy mud, so I wash my ginger and trim anything that looks imperfect or dried out. I once bought some ginger root through one of those grocery delivery apps, and a chunk of it looked kind of off. It was shriveled on the outside, which is normal for store-bought ginger. But instead of being dried out and kind of hard and rigid, it was limp and a little bit floppy. I've never seen ginger do that before, so I tried breaking a chunk off, and wow, what a mistake that was. It must have been at least 4 years ago, and I've only smelled rotten ginger that one time. But even typing out the script for this voiceover is making my stomach churn. If I used the correct descriptive words to explain to you what it smelled like, this video would definitely have to be demonetized. One bad apple spoils the bunch, and a chunk of rotten ginger would obviously ruin this candy, so I like to trim off anything imperfect, shriveled, or dried out looking. Once I'm happy with how it looks, it's time to grate all the ginger and realize that I've been recording this at 120 frames per second by accident. I'm not sure why, but everything that could go wrong did go wrong the last time that I tried to record this video, to the point that this is a full reshoot, and I still had issues. Either way, I'm just glad that I didn't end up accidentally grating my hand. This time. Once you've got all your ginger grated, add enough water to fully cover it. More is fine, but make sure you have enough to where you can stir it safely with a wooden spoon, then bring it up to a simmer. You don't need a rolling boil, and I think some of the flavorful compounds in ginger can break down at higher temperatures anyway, so once you've got it at a simmer, try to keep it there for 30 to 60 minutes. The longer you go, the more tender the fibrous parts of the ginger will be at the end. I tried skipping this step once, and I basically made ginger chewing gum that lost all of its flavor very quickly and left you chewing a wad of ginger fibers. Would not recommend. If you simmer for 30 minutes, you'll probably have a little bit of residual ginger fiber left when you're finished chewing your candy, and if you go for 60 minutes, they'll basically fully dissolve in your mouth when you chew them. I like 60 minutes, but it just depends on how much texture you're looking for. Whichever you choose, when it's done cooking, I set the pot on a trivet to cool for 30 to 60 minutes before I strain off the liquid. Be careful that the ginger mass doesn't all flop out into the strainer at once and splash you. That happened to me once. You don't actually need all the liquid out of it at this stage, you just need most of it, so I kind of poured it over a strainer without letting most of the solid ginger actually leave the pot. The liquid we strained out is your ginger tea. I would advise that you leave it sit overnight in a covered bowl or a container in a cool place, but you don't have to if you don't want to. It's just that some white sediment will settle out, and if you want to try to get rid of that, you can kind of settle it out and then pour the liquid off. Or if you want to get fancy, you can siphon it off the top without disturbing the sediment. Personally, it doesn't bother me if it's a little bit cloudy or if there's some sediment in the bottom, so I just pour mine into mason jars, store it in the fridge when I want to use it, and ignore the sediment. Given that the only two ingredients at this stage were boiling water and ginger, whatever that sediment is came out of the ginger, so maybe it's healthy. I don't know. Back to the ginger in the pot, we're adding as much sugar as we had ginger at the start, and because I used 2 pounds of ginger, I'm adding 2 pounds of white sugar. And before you tell me that's too much, it's candy and we're making syrup. Get over it. I've kept enough liquid in the pot to dissolve the sugar completely, so we're going back on the heat for another 30 minutes once it comes up to a simmer. If you'd like to add red pepper flakes or some other kind of spices to your ginger candy, now is a perfect time. Adding it earlier would have changed the ginger tea, and it would have diluted the flavor of whatever you're adding to it, and adding them now gives you a really nice sweet and spicy flavor if you're adding red pepper flake. If you have a candy thermometer, I think the 190 to 205 range is about where you're looking for. For everyone else, myself included, medium heat and simmer at a temperature that you can easily mix down. This means if you stop mixing, it'll return to a simmer and the top of the surface will have movement and bubbles popping. But when you mix it, that movement should stop until you stop mixing it again. Mixing it down. Stirring often, keep it at a simmer for 30 minutes. You don't want to risk the sugar burning to the bottom or things scorching, so I would suggest staying with it until it's finished cooking at this step. After 30 minutes, take it off the heat, leave it on a trivet to cool. After about an hour, mine was cool enough to safely strain it, and this time I want to get a lot more liquid out. I find using a jelly strainer I can dump everything in and walk away for about an hour and it comes out perfect. You shouldn't need to squeeze or press your ginger, just let gravity pull whatever liquid out it can, then pour out your ginger onto a baking tray lined with parchment paper or a silicone baking mat. If you don't have a jelly funnel sieve strainer thing like I do, you could probably use cheesecloth, a strainer balanced over a bowl, or a mesh soup bag. If a little ginger falls into the syrup, it's not the end of the world. You can just strain it again or pick it out with a fork. I absolutely love the ginger syrup this recipe makes, because you can add a tablespoon of it to a glass of something and completely change the flavor. If you want ginger beer instead of ginger ale, pour a ginger ale, put a little bit of this in it. Now it's a ginger beer. You can add it to a ton of different cocktails to add a little bit of spice to them. It tastes great in tea. I'm drinking a green tea with ginger syrup in it right now. It makes great ginger icing. It's delicious on pancakes. Honestly, I would have made this whole recipe just for the syrup. It's convenient that it also makes candy. As far as storage, I usually pour mine into empty pop bottles or maple syrup containers and keep it in the fridge. And because the ginger and sugar content's so high, I don't even know if it could spoil. Mine's never lasted long enough to find out. What will happen though is that sugar will crystallize into the threads of whatever kind of container you've put it into, so it might be a little difficult to open if you've left it for a couple weeks. Now that the candy is cool enough to safely handle, I'm spreading the warm, grated ginger into an even layer on a cookie sheet, and I'm going through and forming them into little clusters or piles. This part can get a little tedious if you've made as much as I did, but it's worth spending the extra time to make sure they're thick enough. If you make these too thin, they won't stay juicy inside when they dry out. I like my clusters about an inch across and maybe a half an inch tall, or roughly the size of a store-bought candied ginger slice. When you have them separated as best you can, leave them out on a counter in a dry location with good airflow until they've started to set up, usually about 4 to 6 hours, might be as long as 12. At that point, heavily sprinkle them with white sugar. And when I say sprinkle them with a lot of white sugar, I really mean cover them in white sugar. This is going to help the outside develop a nice crisp texture without the inside drying out too much. The first layer of sugar you apply is probably going to absorb into the liquid on the candies, and it might just completely disappear. If that happens, you'll have to come back once or twice, depending on how much liquid was left in your ginger. Ideally, you want to sprinkle them with sugar, check them in about 2 hours, and if there's no visible dry sugar left on the ginger candy, do it again. Keep doing this until a little dry sugar remains on the outside after a couple hours. I had to dust the tops of mine twice. When the tops are starting to look good and things are firm enough to pick up a candy without it falling apart, carefully flip them all over and sprinkle the bottom with more sugar, then let them sit for 24 hours or until you like the texture of them. If you want them to stop drying out and stay how they are, put them in a closed container at room temperature and they should keep for a couple weeks. They will gradually dry out over time though, so you may want to err on the side of too sticky rather than too dry when deciding on when to put them in. Another thing I absolutely love is chocolate-covered ginger. And now that we've made a few pounds of ginger candy, what better way to keep it fresh than to encase it in a layer of sugar and fat? I did this in the wrong order for some reason, so if you're following along, chop up your ginger into bite-sized pieces now. I'm using 100 grams of semi-sweet chips to 10 grams or 10 milliliters, whatever, same thing in this context, of sunflower oil. I microwaved it for 15-second increments, stirred it in between, and when everything was melted together, this is the consistency I had. Now I know I'm going to get yelled at in the comments section for this, but I chose to use sunflower oil to thin my chocolate down for a few reasons. If you want to use butter or coconut oil or any other fat or no fat at all in your chocolate, you go ahead. You just might have to keep it a little warmer than I did to keep it dippable and thin. And that's the other reason. I'm trying to film this, so I don't really want to invite more problems than I have to. Problems like having to run back to the microwave a few times, or having my melted chocolate look like a bowl of Cocoa Puff cereal from all the broken off ginger bits. The trade-off is that my chocolate might be a little bit too thin to leave this out at room temperature, so I'll have to keep these refrigerated. The thing is, if I were to leave these out in plain sight on the counter, I would end up eating them in a day or two, so keeping them out of sight in the fridge is a bit of a blessing in disguise. To prep the candied ginger, I'm just cutting everything into bite-sized chunks. You could make them bigger if you want, but I prefer the no-mess option of a one-bite candied ginger chocolate. Calling them that also makes it sound like I could charge $5 for 7 of them. And while you might think, why didn't I just make the candy smaller in the previous steps? Why did I make big chunks of candy just to cut them all up? Because the insides wouldn't stay juicy. It'd be hard and dry all the way through, which is fine if that's what you want, but it's not what I was hoping for here. Once you've got your ginger and chocolate ready, get to dipping. I'm using a fork and shaking it around however I can to get as much chocolate off as possible and placing each piece onto a plate that I'll stick into the fridge for a few hours when I'm done. I won't make you watch the whole thing, but I ran out after filling the first plate, so 100 grams of chocolate and 10 grams of oil should be about right for one plate of ginger. I made a second plate because I wasn't confident that I could stay out of it while it set up overnight in the fridge, and the large empty space on one of these plates kinda confirms that. I've found the best way to dislodge the solidified chocolate is to press as close to the plate as you can and squeeze towards yourself. Usually the chocolate detaches and they pop off in one piece, but it can take a bit of practice, and if one gets damaged, then, eat it. Because I used oil in my chocolate, I'll have to keep these in the fridge, and that also means that the heat of my hands will melt them a little, so it's best to work quickly. If you'll excuse my chocolate-encrusted fingernails, here's how they look. You can see some of the ginger fibers on the inside, but the texture reminds me of puffed rice, kind of like Rice Krispies or a Nestle Crunch bar. Because I cooked them for the full hour before adding the sugar, the fibers are nice and tender and it melts in your mouth as you chew, but the crystallized ginger gives a really amazing texture to the whole thing. And the final byproduct from this recipe comes from the leftover sugar and dried candy ginger in the tray. While you could throw this out, there's nothing wrong with it, so if you put it in a blender and blitz it into powdered ginger sugar, now you have powdered ginger sugar. Ever had a cupcake that was a little too bland? Ginger sugar. Coffee cake that has too much cinnamon and not enough other flavors? Ginger sugar. Making an apple crisp and you want the taste of ginger without it overpowering the apples? Ginger sugar in the topping. Or maybe ginger syrup in the apples. Or maybe both. You know what? I'm gonna go make myself a ginger and apple crisp. But if you've enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, check out one of the videos on screen or subscribe for more homemade food.